No, it was the week before that we were having trouble with the sound.
There was one you had trouble with the picture.
Oh, no, that's right. Yeah, it was the week before that the picture wasn't working, but the sound was. Now, that looks like it's right. I'm going to close it. And at the risk of being far too self-absorbed, I'm going to check that it's broadcasting to myself. Because I can go through my Rabbi account to see my personal account. Wonderful world we live in.
Yeah.
So you're texting yourself. That's the height of being bizarre.
It has a certain weird feel to it, yes. Yeah, there's a certain, that's me. I don't have a text yet from Penelope. Yeah, enough about me. Let's hear from myself.
What do you think about me?
All right.
Okay.
I am just finer than a frog hair.
This I have never heard before in my whole life. A frog hair.
Finer than a frog. That's a new one.
Dogs don't have hair.
Very good.
Okay, it looks like it's working.
New version of doing the microphone. Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, good. All right, technology has decided to play nice today, so we can get going. So it's nice to see everybody around again. Before we continue, I wanted to give you a reminder that for the next 3 Wednesdays, you are on self-study duty. That means for the next 3 Wednesdays, I'll be in England, and you'll have to study on your own. There are many other fine resources out there to help you get through the Torah portion, and there will be many fine Divrei Torah in my absence on Friday night and Saturday. So you can get your fix in lots of ways, but make sure you keep up with your study. But let's get down to work for today. A leader. What's a leader? Give me some words, some ideas.
A person in charge that helps other people.
In charge. And if you don't mind, I'm going to break off help as a separate, because is everybody who's in charge always helpful?
No.
Not always. And is everybody who's helpful in charge?
No.
Sometimes not. Anything else?
One who's first.
As in the line leader in elementary school. It's no special rank or privilege. It's just you happen to be first.
I was also thinking
Normally
about
they're
old technology of movie film projectors.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still first, just like
It's
the lines in
the-
elementary
The
school.
thing that comes first for just by virtue of being first.
Yeah.
Good.
Decision maker.
Does that mean if the leader is making decisions, the rest of us don't?
Not a good leader.
Not a good. So you mean a good leader would lead people to good decisions rather than make them for them? Got it?
A motivator.
Yes.
Meaning
Coaching.
Keeps the morale up.
keeps the morale up for the people, inspires people, cause, purpose, all that stuff. So it's not necessarily doing it for them or deciding for them, but steering them emotionally in the right direction. Stoking the fire.
Teacher.
Teacher. Okay. So who are our leaders in Bamidbar, in the wilderness? What's that? So, number 1 on the list, Moses, right? How as well does Moses fit these categories? In charge? Yeah, pretty much first. Kind of. I mean, not firstborn, but definitely first in the sense of first of the one to come into contact with God in the mission of the Exodus and such. Decision maker. You can't really say anything other than helper. Yeah, that whole, getting water and such, splitting the sea. Teacher. By definition, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe our teacher. Motivator. Yes. Or at least he's trying to be. Anyone else out there leading?
Aaron.
God.
Let's come back to God and get Aaron on the board as well, because God is a rather special case. Aaron fit this as well? Some of it. He's definitely not first. He doesn't make a whole lot of decisions that aren't made by his brother. But he is in charge of one section of the community. And he is definitely meant to be teaching. And he certainly is, both in the text as well as understood by the sages, a help to the community. And definitely almost his primary role is motivator through the temple service, the sacrificial service. God? Well, the ultimate first, in every possible meaning of the word. But a bit hard to follow, I think, for the average person, or otherwise we wouldn't need additional people. And I think the people are learning to connect to God as their leader, their melech, their king. But that's going to be hard to take. And as a matter of fact, we're eventually going to get where the people want a regular king rather than God altogether. But that comes later on in the book of Samuel.
Joshua be there as a war leader?
Well, Joshua is
As a
there,
battle leader.
but at the moment he's more of an adjunct to Moses.
So is Aaron.
So is Aaron, but Aaron has at least one sphere where he leads.
Right.
Joshua doesn't lead anything. He's more like a colonel.
Yeah.
I mean, so you could say he's a delegated leader, but he's not a primary leader. But that's kind of hard. I mean, obviously, God, infinite is not an issue, but for the rest of them, that's for the thousands and thousands of people. That's not a huge crew, is it? To be leading? Can we imagine why Moses might be getting a little burnt out by this point? Good. With that in mind, let's take a look at where we are in the narrative. Because in Bamidbar, it's almost all about the narrative, which is why it's such a shame that so many people taper off their attendance of synagogue or their Torah study during the summer months, because some of the most amazing stories about our people, our culture, our leadership come during this time. So we are in Parashat Behaalotechah, which is so much fun to say, and we're going to be on chapter 11 of the book of Numbers. So page 827. How are we doing? Good? Do we have a volunteer? Somebody who would love to read while I interrupt them? Arian, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes the leader is the one who'll do the job no one else will do.
You have to add that to the.
It doesn't fit on the board.
The people took to complaining bitterly before the Lord. The Lord heard and was incensed. A fire of the Lord broke out against them, ravaging the outskirts of the camp. The people cried out to Moses. Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. That place was named Taberah, because the fire of the Lord had broken out against them.
All right. So people complain. God gets angry. There's a huge fire. A bunch of people get burned. Moses prays. Fire stops. Microcosm of what's going to happen in multiple situations. We're going to get a lot more detail in others, but that basic pattern, something wrong with the people, some reaction from God, some intercession, some resolution. Make sense? Good leadership here?
Yeah,
Yes, because
because he helps people when they ask.
we've got a lot of help going on here, right? Stopping the destruction from taking place. But happened in the first place.
Destruction in the first.
Why did it get to this point of destruction? Why were the people complaining against God? Why didn't Moses motivate them? Why didn't he teach them that this was not a good way to be going? Right? I mean, is the policeman who arrests the criminal a good leader, or would we expect a good leader to be the leaders of the community that prevented crime from becoming a problem the policeman had to stop? It's a little bit trickier than just, yay, he stopped it. But what about preventing it?
And it happens time after time after time.
In fact, it happens so repeatedly that the very next paragraph is another incident. Right? Because these first few verses of chapter 11 sound like just an introduction to the next paragraph, but it is a separate incident. And we're going to move right into a second and perhaps more famous incident. Those of you that like quail will be pleased.
The riffraff in their midst found a gluttonous craving. And then the Israelites wept and said, if only we had meat to eat. We remember the fish that we used to eat free in Egypt. Whoops.
Did you do 2 pages?
Yeah.
The story probably wouldn't work like that.
Cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. Now our gullets are shriveled. There is nothing at all. Nothing but this manna to look to.
All right. Nothing but this manna, which is worthless in their eyes or not worth anything. So what's the problem?
They're hungry. They're frustrated.
They're hungry?
No, they're not
Well,
hungry, they're bored.
They're not hungry. They're bored, or they're
They
just,
want more variety.
they're fed up with being fed up with manna,
Yes.
right? That they're not hungry. That's very important to make sure we got it clear here, right? These people are not starving. They've been well fed. They're just sick of it, or as they claim, missing all of the good stuff they had back in Egypt.
Isn't there a midrash that says something that the manna will taste whatever you want it to taste?
Absolutely. And in fact, the very next few verses is about how wonderful manna is and why they shouldn't be complaining. But who's leading at this point?
The people.
Which particular people?
Riffraff.
The riffraff.
Every-
The Erev Rav, right? This riffraff, these hangers-on, these other people that had sort of joined the nation are the ones who first start grumbling, and then everyone else joins in. They're like, yeah, you know what? You're right. I remember those sardines. Those were tasty. Oh, what I wouldn't give for a sardine. And now we've got massive dissent. But yes, go ahead, Marion, and fill us in on how good manna was.
Now the manna was like coriander seed, and in color it was like bdellium. The people would go about and gather it, grind it between millstones, or pound it in a mortar. Boil it in a pot and make it into cakes. It tasted like rich cream. When the dew fell on the camp at night, the manna would fall upon it.
Right, so this manna was constantly there, it was always available, and it tasted wonderful. And then, yes, the Midrash goes on to say, not only did it taste wonderful, but it tasted like whatever you wanted it to taste like. But apparently that's not enough after 2 years and a few months at this point. They want meat. They want meat. Now, there's another bit of a problem here with this. They had meat. Remember the whole book of Leviticus, where we talked about all those sacrifices?
Right.
Remember when we left and they talked about they left with their flocks and their herds? And remember when they get to the land and Reuben is given special land on the other side of the Jordan because it was good for all of their herds? They've got cattle and sheep. They've got plenty of animals that they could be slaughtering for meat. Well, maybe not plenty. That's the problem. Because in the ancient world, well, really in the agricultural world all the way up until the modern times, the average farmer wouldn't just go out and kill a cow because he wanted a burger. The slaughtering of a sheep or a cow was a major undertaking. You would do it for a feast, you would do it for a wedding, you would do it for a major holiday, but you didn't just do it because you were peckish. And that meant that they probably were not eating meat all that often, even though there were cows all around them, which must have been kind of frustrating. So they could have satisfied their craving, but for whatever reason of animal husbandry or selfishness of, well, why should it be my cow? Or if God can give us manna, why can't God give us meat too? You know, as long as we're getting freebies, let's ask for something else. But there is some tension within their request that the reality of it would have been even more offensive to God at the time. It's like, you're asking me for meat now because the wonderful manna that I'm giving you isn't good enough, and you're not willing to kill the cow that's standing next to you while you're complaining to me about meat. Really, guys? Really?
Laziness.
In the extreme, and in multiple forms. I mean, yes, it's like, you know, there's a beer in the fridge and I really like one, but it's in the fridge. You know, why can't I ever get a drink around here? Get up, ah. And that is the attitude you have to have in mind for both Moses and God as the narrative continues.
Moses made people weeping, every clan apart, each person at the entrance of his tent. The Lord was very angry, and Moses was distressed. And Moses said to the Lord, why have you dealt ill with your servant, and why have I not enjoyed your favor that you have laid the burden of all this people upon me? Did I conceive all this people? Did I bear them, that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries an infant, to the land that you have promised on oath to their fathers?
Am I their dad? Really? I mean, do I have to put up with this griping and whining like a father would put up with the griping and whining of his children? To a point, Hannah. They're not my kids. I have no obligation to them. Why do I have to do this?
But is he whining to God?
Yes, absolutely.
Where am I to get meat to give to all this people when they whine before me and say, give us meat to eat? I cannot carry all this people by myself, for it is too much for me. If you would deal thus with me, kill me rather, I beg you, and let me see no more of my wretchedness.
Right? So Moses is basically saying, you know what? It's time for the golden watch and my retirement, and I'll just take my exit now because I am.
Sort of like being on the board of directors.
You haven't been on other boards of directors if you think this board of directors is like this. But yeah, Moses is basically saying, I'd rather be dead than have to put up with this one more day because I can't handle it. Now, of course, the underlying theological fallacy is who's really handling it? God. Right? Where's the meat going to come from? God. I mean, it's not Moses's responsibility to provide the meat, but Moses is taking it as though it is because Moses feels himself as the leader as being responsible for helping and preparing them and teaching them and all of that. It's not working. He can't help them with what they want, and they shouldn't want it, which means you didn't teach and motivate them properly. So just put me out of my misery, God. Time to resign. And of course, God's not having it.
Then the Lord said to Moses, gather for me 70 of Israel's elders, of whom you have experienced as elders and officers of the people, and bring them to the tent of meeting, and let them take their place there with you. I will come down and speak with you there, and I will draw upon the spirit that is on you, and put it upon them. They shall share the burden of the people with you, and you shall not bear it alone. And say to the people, purify yourselves for tomorrow, and you shall eat meat. We have been whining before the Lord, and saying, if only we had meat to eat. Indeed, we were better off in Egypt. The Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat. You shall not eat. You shall eat not 1 day, not 2, not even 5 days, or 10 or 20, but a whole month until it comes out of your nostrils and becomes loathsome to you. For you have rejected the Lord who is among you by whining before him and saying, oh, why did we ever leave Egypt?
All right, so what's the solution?
God will provide.
God will provide. You want meat?
I'll give you.
I'll give you meat. This is you catch your kid smoking a cigarette and you make him smoke the entire carton in 30 minutes, right? Until he's green in the face and throwing up everywhere. And they go, that'll teach you. Teach you something, but but that's the theory here. Is it seems to be you want meat, I'll give you meat. And this proof, who's God proving himself to? He's proving himself to Moses. Right? Moses said, where am I going to get? Moses is wondering, how am I going to feed all these people? And God is saying, I will provide the meat, and they will choke on it. That's how much I will provide. But there's a second part of the solution. Let me round that out for you.
The 70 elders.
The 70 elders. Right? We all get caught up in the drama of the meat coming out from their nostrils. But what's going to be happening with these 70 guys?
They're going to share the burden and the responsibility.
They're going to share the burden of the responsibility, and
they're going to hear what God says.
And they're going to hear what God says in the way that Moses hears what God says.
That's what it sounds Sounds like
And this helps
just
how?
point.
Because God is really talking to Moses. They forget about that sometimes.
So they forget about that. And if they're the 70 elders, what's their role in the community too?
They should be leaders too.
They are already leaders. I mean, that's what an elder meant in the ancient world. It meant that you were chosen by your tribe, by your community, your clan, to be a leader, and they were the head of all of these different clans. And so the idea was they will receive a measure of that same spirit that Moses is experiencing, and hopefully that will inspire them to be better able to inspire their people, to better able to connect them to God, so that we don't have this whining, griping, complaining, and everything else. Because apparently everything coming just through Moses is not doing the trick.
This is the second time this kind of solution has
Mhm.
been offered. First it was with the judges, because Moses couldn't
Mhm.
handle all the petty complaints. God says, get some judges.
Well, actually, his father-in-law says,
Right,
get some
his-
judges.
Right.
Yes,
What's his name?
Yitro or Jethro.
Jethro.
Right.
Jethro
Right.
pushes him in the right direction. And this is a similar kind of thing. Can't handle everything on your own. Moses was a micromanager.
Well, with a macro problem.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, I could see an additional aspect to
Mhm.
this though, with the elders kind of like, and maybe this is because of the whole whining dynamic, but the elders are also striking me as either an uncle who lives in the house or an older sibling who then is in a position to speak to the younger kids and basically say, look, you're heading down a road here
Mm-hmm.
that you don't want to go.
Right.
And I recognize the fact that hearing it from your father is difficult, but I just want to give you an alternative perspective here that you may not want to do this.
Very good. So you might not listen to Dad, meaning Moses,
Mhm.
but maybe you'll listen to me because I'm not in that same hierarchical system that you're rebelling against.
Right.
And so maybe you'll take my advice a bit more seriously. But shouldn't that have been what the leaders were already supposed to be doing? But they were apparently among the people complaining, because it said every man in their tent and complaining. So even the elders must have already been griping. And the idea here is that if we infuse them with the right spirit, they'll infuse the people under them and so on down, because it's not making its way out of the Moses zone to spread deeply enough. And so these folks should help. All right, we got a little bit more of a story to get through.
But Moses said, the people who are with me number 600,000 men. Yet you say, I will give them enough meat to eat for a whole month. Could enough flocks and herds be slaughtered to suffice them? Or could all the fish of the sea be gathered for them to suffice them? And the Lord answered Moses, is there a limit to the Lord's powers? Power.
Right. So I split the sea, and you're wondering if I can deliver meat? Really?
You shall soon see whether what I have said happens to you or not.
Right. So Moses is still distressed by this. He's not 100% sure this is going to solve anything, because how could it even work? And God is saying, I'm sorry, did you just doubt me?
Yeah.
Or what? And indeed, there are commentators who point to this incident as being the first crack in Moses's ability to connect to God well, which eventually leads to the striking of the rock and his disbarment from the land of Israel. Because this is really the first confrontation where Moses isn't just pleading with God to change his mind about something, but is actually saying, I don't think this is going to happen the way you said, God. He's questioning God, not questioning himself. It's not, oh, I can't speak so well. Who am I to go to Pharaoh or whatever? It's, God, I don't think that can happen. And it's like, yeah, the first word in that sentence was God. The rest of the sentence can't be, I don't think that can happen. Okay, onward.
Moses went out and reported the words of the Lord to the people. He gathered 70 of the people's elders and stationed them around the tent. Then the Lord came down in a cloud and spoke to him. He drew upon the spirit that was on him and put it upon the 70 elders. And when the Spirit rested upon them, they spoke in ecstasy.
They spoke in prophecy. The word is not ecstasy like the English word ecstasy. It means they spoke prophetically.
But did not continue.
And then stopped. Okay, so yay! Okay, that's odd, especially when we compare it to the next section. Keep reading.
2 men, one named Eldad and the other Medad, had remained in camp, yet the Spirit rested upon them.
They weren't at the tent, but they start getting the Spirit too.
They were among those recorded, but they had not gone out to the tent. And they spoke in prophecy in the camp.
Yep.
A youth ran out and told Moses, saying, Eldad and Medad are acting the prophet in the camp. And Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' lieutenant from the youth, spoke up and said, My Lord Moses, restrain them. But Moses said to him, Are you brought up on my account? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets, that the Lord put his Spirit upon them. Moses then re-entered the camp together with the elders of Israel.
All right, and then a whole bunch of wind comes, and you get 3 feet deep quail that the people end up indeed eating so much that they are sick to death of. But we're going to skip the rest of the narrative right now. Please read it on your own time, of course. And let's see what all of this has to do with leadership. So our texts today are from a wonderful cluster that come from Midrash Rabbah, from one of the earlier Midrash collections. This one obviously taken from Bamidbar Rabbah, the collection that has to do with the Book of Numbers. We have handouts all around? Yes, Hannah? Were you asking a question? Fixing your hair?
Yeah.
Okay. Your hand went up.
Oh.
I'm attentive to hands being raised in my class. All right, Marianne.
It is he that builds his upper chambers in the heaven, and has founded his vault upon the earth.
All right, so that word agudato, which is being translated as vault, is going to come back as a link to a later interpretation.
To what may this be likened? To a palace built upon boats. As long as the boats are joined together, the palace that is upon them stands.
Right, so think about it. His upper chamber is in heaven, and it is founded upon the earth. The earth is considered to be transient and fragile compared to the perfection of heaven. So it's like building a palace on boats, right? You got 100 boats, and you sort of lash them together, and you build up this beautiful palace on top of it. The palace is great, but it's built on boats. If the boats drift or separate, then the palace collapses. You got the imagery here? Okay, so now we're going to apply it.
Same way can explain it is he that builds his upper chambers, the heaven.
Sorry, in the heaven.
In the heaven. His throne is established on high. When Israel for one band
Forms one band. Now my typing is really taking a hit.
forms one band.
Aguda, right? So remember how we had that agudato as the vault, and now we're using the Hebrew word aguda, meaning a one band or unit, a collection. And so they're saying,
Accordingly, the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Moses, Gather unto me. Why? Because the gathering together of righteous people is a benefit to them and a benefit to the world. The gathering together of wicked people, however, is a stumbling block to them and a stumbling block to the world.
all right, so what are we getting here from this midrash? There's 2 main topics, one about the gathering and the other about the boats and the building. Anyone want to take a stab at either of those pieces? Interpret in your own words. Yeah, so this is where midrash is a little bit hard to get around in its initial version. Right? Usually we encounter midrash already pre-interpreted for us, but this is what it looks like in the original. Well, the original's in Hebrew, but you get the point. So the idea is saying that God is established, God's throne is established when Israel is unified. A very important reminder as today is the Unity Day, reminding ourselves of the unity our people showed when the 3 young students were kidnapped and murdered last year in Israel. And the country came together in trying to find and rescue them before it was discovered that they had been killed. That when we act as one, when we are unified, God's throne is firmly established. And the corollary then is, if we're not unified,
Then it makes problems for us.
it makes problems for us. And go the radical theology here.
And it makes problems for God.
And the throne is shaky, right? Remember, God's throne is a symbol of God's God's recognition, the world's recognition of God's rule of the world, meaning the people recognize that the guidance God has given us to live right according to the ways of the universe is recognized and followed. When we ignore that, specifically in Judaism, by fighting each other or being antagonistic and moving away from each other, that presence of God is felt less in the world, right? Because you lose the model that Israel is meant to be of what it means to follow God. And a king without subjects is not known as king by the rest of the world.
So today, in today's Israel, there is a lot of, there are many differences, and they seem to be pulling away from
Yes.
one another.
Yes. I can only agree. And that's a problem. Because we need to pull together. And that's not just for us, but it's for allowing God's presence to be felt better by the rest of the world, not just because it's nice to be together. And that's the really theologically radical statement that's being made in this midrash, is that our ability to act cohesively impacts the recognition by the rest of the world of God as God.
Yeah, Rabbi, isn't there also I'm blocking on the name of this poet, who, and I'm probably not going to articulate it correctly, who sort of postulates that God actually wants communication. That, obviously omnipotent, doesn't need it.
God doesn't need it, but wants us to experience it from our side.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I'm just wondering if that theme, that it's not just an obedience theme.
Correct.
That it's also a desire to have a certain interaction or wanting us to experience a certain action. So I don't know if benevolence is the right word, but it's much more of a human dynamic than simply sort of an autocratic, here are the rules, this is what you must be doing, and if you don't, here's one of the consequences. Correct.
There is a layer. Whenever I talk about the people following the way that God wants us to behave in this world, it doesn't just mean, don't step on the crack kind of following the rules. It means that we are not just following the rules, but doing so in a spirit of reaching out towards God to truly tap into this communication, this connection. And that's part and parcel of the entirety of recognizing God as God. It's not just following the rules for the rules' sake or to avoid punishment. Yes.
And the other aspect of this that I thought about, and this may be a little bit more humanistic, but in terms of hearing that quiet voice of wisdom,
right?
That when I, let's say, am in a spirit of wickedness or self-centeredness or what have you, that voice goes away.
Yes. And that's one of the second part of this midrash is so powerful, because it's reminding us that, but just being together isn't enough. We have to be together for the right reasons. Because if you get a whole group together of righteous people, it's good for them because it helps reinforce and guide each of them, and it's good for the world because of what they're able to accomplish. That's one of the reasons why we found synagogues, in order for that to be a place of the gathering of people who are trying to do righteously. On the other hand, if people are gathering together to do wicked things, the conspiracy, the den of thieves idea, the swapping parties that people do, and so I've heard, and all of that. That's not just bad for them, but it creates a cancer in the world that is poisonous to the rest of the community as well. And it's not just gathering for gathering's sake, it's gathering for the right purpose that we're talking about when we say band together. Okay, but checking the clock, and we've got miles to go, so onward.
Another exposition of the text.
Right, and this is a common feature, sorry, interrupting after all of 6 words. This is a common feature of Midrash, which is there'll be one interpretation, and then there will be another interpretation of the same line of text. That's okay. Right? When we come down to, is this chicken kosher or not, then yes, we do need to eventually agree on something or else we can't eat. But when it comes to what does this line mean theologically, philosophically, morally, ethically, oftentimes there are multiple interpretations presented, which are all perfectly fine within our tradition. So don't be upset that we are using the words to mean something completely different from our first sentence or our first midrash.
Another exposition of the text, gather unto me 70 men. When the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Moses, gather unto me 70 men. Moses thought, what shall I do? If I bring 5 from each tribe, that would be just 60. If I bring 6 from one tribe, 5 from another, I will introduce jealousy between them.
Right? So what's Moses' problem?
How to get an even number.
Yeah, when I've got 12 tribes, how do I get 70 people and make it even? Right? Because if they're already complaining about the meat situation, well, introduce another element of something for them to gripe about. It's just, that's not going to solve anything. So how am I going to get 70 people fairly distributed among the 12 tribes without anybody putting a knife in my back?
Make it 72 and make life easier.
Well, that's going to be part of how it works, but it's
I
also,
understand that, but it just seems an unnecessary problem.
an unnecessary problem which introduces a necessary lesson, which is it doesn't have to be perfectly even for it to be fair. Something that and something that I've tried to explain to my own children, because children are very, very focused on fairness. And oftentimes for the youngest of our children, they focus on fairness being absolute equality. And it takes a while for them to learn that you can get 2 presents and that he can get 3 presents, and that can be fair if one of your presents was bigger than his, that it can be fair despite not being the same number or the same exact thing. That's a very important lesson for everybody to learn, not just kids, and the tribes need to learn it too. Because by the time they reach the land of Israel, the distribution of land is not going to look very fair. So they better get used to the fact that it can be fair even if it's not the same. So how do they solve it? And this is, it took me a while to figure this out, so I'll see if I can walk you through it because it's a brilliant idea, or maybe you'll catch on to it sooner.
He took 72 ballots and wrote on them elder, and another 2 ballots he left blank. Then he mixed them up in an urn and proclaimed, come and draw your ballots. A man who drew out a ballot inscribed with the word elder knew he had been appointed an elder. One who drew out a blank knew he had not been appointed, and the superintendent would say to him, there is still a ballot in the urn inscribed with the word elder. Had you been worthy of being appointed, you would have drawn it. This procedure having been adopted, the elders were duly appointed.
Okay. So here's how it works. You got 72 ballots, and you have an additional 2 that are blank. Right? So 72 that say winner, and 2 that just are blank. You put them all together, you have 74. And you have people pull them out one by one. Now, the reason why they had 72 plus 2, which means that at the end, you've got 4 extra ballots floating at the bottom of the hat, was so that even the very last person who polled could have pulled a ballot elder, right? Because there would have been one in there by the time he came to poll. And he pulled blank, which means he had an even shot, or a fair shot at least, of pulling the word elder. It's not as though he was just unlucky for being last. And really, it's clear that the rabbis had dealt with people being upset about pulling things out of a hat, because that's a very good solution, where no one says, well, that's not fair. But it was fair because you could have drawn elder if you'd pulled the right slip of paper.
So God manipulated the ballot polling.
Well, that's the implication.
Exactly.
Right? Because now that it's a lottery, it's out of the hands of Moses, and it's not being politicized by the elders. It's just on the hands of God. And therefore, if you pull blank, you have no one to be upset with except God, and you really shouldn't be doing that. So it's okay. It's okay.
What if one of the two ballots that were still left in the urn was a blank one?
Well, then you pull. At the end, you would have eventually had enough, you would have eventually reached 70, and then you were done. But this would have given 72 people, the 6 from each tribe, a chance to pull, and each would have had a reasonable opportunity to actually pull an elder slip. Just 2 people wouldn't have. 2 people would have pulled blank, but even while they were pulling blank, it never would have been that when they pulled blank, there were only blank slips at the bottom of the hat. There always would have been at least an elder slip along with it. So that way everybody who reached in had a chance to pull out the word elder. Which if you'd only had 70 ballots, or 72 with 2 blank out of the 72, 70 that said elder and 2 that were blank, then by the end, there's a good chance the last 2 guys would have been only drawing blank. And that's not fair. But the last 2 guys also had a shot.
How did they choose the people who were going to pull advance in first place?
Well, the idea is that the tribes would have had 6 elders or more that were already leaders within the tribe, and they would have been the people who came forward for their tribe to pull. And this is the way they try to mitigate the friction from the ultimate. But again, to also remind that it's apparently a godly decision of who's coming, not Moses' fault. Okay? But there were 2 people who we have already heard about. Marion, if you keep going.
Eldad and Medad, who were there, withdrew into the background, saying, "We are unworthy of being among the appointed elders." In return for this self-effacement, they proved to be superior to the elders in 5 years.
All right, so we often think of leaders as being people who step forward. Well, Eldad and Medad stepped back. They said, you know what? I know we are elders in our group, but I'm not worthy to be part of this 70, so we're not even going to come up to participate in the draw. And yet, if you remember from the Torah text, they're the 2 who end up prophesying in the camp. Even though they didn't go to the tent, they are still being given, in some way, as we're going to see, the spirit of prophecy. And in fact, they even come out ahead of the leaders who were appointed. What's that telling us? What's the virtue that's being extolled here? Humility. Exactly. That the best leaders are humble. Not every leader is. God knows not every leader is humble, but the best leaders are. And that's why we're giving them their due cheer for having taken a step back.
The elders prophesied only regarding the following
Day.
Da. As may be inferred from the text. And say thou unto the people, sanctify yourselves against tomorrow.
Right? They're only talking about tomorrow. So therefore, the elders had a very limited period of prophecy.
While those prophesied concerning what would happen at the end of 40 years, as may be inferred from the text. But there remained 2 men in the camp, and they prophesied.
Right? And they apparently kept prophesying. It doesn't say they stopped. They kept going.
What did they prophesy? Prophecy?
Sorry, that should be what did they prophesy, yes.
Some say the downfall of God, and others say that they prophesied that Moses would die and Joshua would bring Israel into the land. There is proof of this in what Joshua says to Moses. And Joshua the son of Nun answered and said, "My Lord Moses, shut them in."
Right, so why would Joshua have been upset about them prophesying? Well, perhaps they were prophesying that Joshua was going to replace Moses and Moses would be dead before they got to the land of Israel. And that's the kind of thing that, yes, I know we think every leader would love to know they're going to become leader sooner, but Joshua, being a good person, wouldn't be looking forward to the idea of Moses dying before reaching the land of Israel. I mean, after all, Israel is just over there. Remember, this is before the spies and before the 40-year edict. So as far as everyone knows, they're going to Israel in a few weeks' time. And so for them to come out and say, Joshua will lead us into Egypt because Moses will die before we get there, Joshua's like, shut them up. I mean, how could they say such a horrible thing? And Moses, of course, is saying, you know, we'll see. We'll see. All right, onward. How are they also superior? Continuing our list.
The elders did not enter the land, but Eldad and Medad did.
Right, the elders were part of the older group who died before we reached the land.
The elders were not explicitly mentioned by name, while these were.
We know Eldad and Medad. We don't know the names of any of the other 70 elders. So apparently they are getting more thumbs up from the text.
The prophetic spirit of the elders came to an end.
right? Because it said, and they didn't prophesy anymore, and they stopped.
That of the elders came from Moses, as it says, and I will take of the spirit which is upon thee and put it upon them. These, however, derived their spirit of prophecy from the Holy One. Blessed be he, as it says, and the spirit rested upon him.
Right? So again, fine distinction in the text. The text talks about Moses putting his spirit upon the 70 elders, but Eldad and Medad just get the Spirit of God, even though they're not at the gathering at the tent, which would seem to imply greater approbation for them, that they were worthy of God's Spirit resting upon them directly. They didn't need Moses to be the gasoline pump to put it on them. Does that make sense? Maybe? Sort of? Okay.
If you ask,
Which you should.
seeing that the elders derived their prophetic spirit from that of Moses, was the latter deprived of any of his prophetic spirit?
Right, well, wait a minute, none of you asked this, but if this is Moses' spirit, and we think of it like a balloon, and he has to inflate the spiritual balloon of 70 elders, well, even if Moses' balloon was enormous, for it to inflate 70 others, it has to diminish, right? Right? Isn't that, if I have $1 million and I give $100,000 to 10 people, I got nothing.
But it's not necessarily limited. God can always infuse more spiritual.
And that's where the Midrash has to run, right? That it's not a finite resource in that way. That if you think about the spirit that Moses had as a finite resource, then you're making a grave mistake. Instead, and this is a beautiful metaphor that has been used for 1,000 other things ever since, but hey, we did it first.
The answer is in the negative. To what may this be compared? To a candle that was burning and at which many candles were kindled. Yet the light of the flame of the first did not diminish. So it was here also. Moses lost nothing of his own, for it says, and there hath not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses.
Right, so Moses is unique, and nothing was diminished from him because all he did was light the spark of the Spirit in each of them. And his, like a candle, doesn't get smaller just because it was used to light the others. Yes, we've all heard that metaphor in other places, yes? Well, take some credit for it. All right. There's another question about all of this leadership 70 people thing, which Malka brought up with regards to the judges, but we can go back even further, which is, didn't we already have leaders? Didn't we already have groups of 70s? So who are these guys? And why weren't the others doing their job? So we're going to get a couple different explanations of where the original 70 went.
Was it not already said in Egypt, go and gather the elders of Israel together? Pharaoh appointed the Egyptian taskmasters over the officers of Israel, while the officers were put in charge of the rest of the people.
Right, we got the hierarchy there. Right, so you have Egyptian taskmasters who are giving instructions to the Israelite elders, the leaders, and the Israelite leaders are then the ones who have the unfavorable task of having to tell all of the Israelites what they need to do. Right, I know that oftentimes we think of the slavery experience in Egypt being similar to the slavery experience in America, but the Israelites were a separate community. It wasn't as though they were owned, by individual Egyptians. They were a giant mass of people, and they were controlled by their own leaders who were given their instructions by the Egyptians, which is both better because it meant we had somewhat of our own community, unlike the African American experience in our country. But it was also worse because it meant that much of the task of forcing the people to work fell on the shoulders of our own people.
If the taskmasters found the bricks lacking, they beat the officers, as it says, and the officers of the children of Israel were beaten. The officers allowed themselves to be beaten for the rest of the people, and did not hand them over, thinking, it is better that we should be beaten and the rest of the people should be spared.
Right? So that's a leader. The officers of Israel, when the taskmaster came and said, you know what, you're below your quota of bricks, didn't say, well, you know, Charlie over there, he was sitting under a palm tree all day and he didn't make his quota, so that's why we're short. So beat him up, throw him in the stocks, deprive him of food, whatever. They said, yes, we're low. I accept the punishment. Because they would rather they were beaten than the other people of Israel.
Thus when the Holy One, blessed be he, said, gather unto me 70 men. Moses said to the Holy One, blessed be he, sovereign of the universe. I know not who is worthy and who is not.
All right, so that's Moses' other problem. Now, like I said, the other midrash came up with the solution of drawing names out of a hat. But this solution is saying, no, there are qualities that let us choose who the 70 should be.
God said, whom you know to be the elders of the people, and officers over them.
Right, which was the continuation of the verse where God said, gather the people to me. He says, you know who are the officers over the people. And this is hearkening back to the other use of the officers of the people way back in the book of Exodus, the people who were beaten instead of the rest of the nation.
Namely, those elders and officers who submitted their bodies to be smitten for the people's sake in Egypt. In return for the having submitted themselves to be beaten for the community, they shall bear the burden of the people with you. From this learn that one who sacrifices himself for the sake of Israel merits glory, greatness, and Ruach HaKodesh.
Ruach HaKodesh means the Spirit of God to rest upon you. Right? So if you are willing to sacrifice yourself to help the rest of our people, you are meriting greatness and glory and God's Spirit resting upon you. Because that's where the 70 people came from. It wasn't out of a hat, they had earned it. It wasn't just blind luck or godly fiat. It was a just reward for what they had gone through when they were put in that position of trying to lead the people as slaves.
Wait, so which one is true?
Well, yes.
Okay.
So when we wrestle with Midrashim, we have two places to wrestle. One is within the Midrash itself of what does this Midrash mean? What is it trying to teach? What is its lesson? How did they come to this conclusion? What is the logical apparatus or the language connection that they're using? And that occupies most of our time. But when we step back and then we say, oh, but there's another explanation, the first question that pops into our mind is, well, wait a minute, all the work I did on that last paragraph, if that isn't what really happened, why did I do it? And the answer is, we don't know for sure which one really happened, but we do know that each of the Midrashim are really true in their statement of what is important in life, right? There is truth, and then there is a true account. And the Midrash was always more concerned with truth than a true account, because the true account was lost to the mists of time, right? Until we can look into the past through some giant Viewmaster time machine and see exactly what happened, the best we can do is come up with what would be an appropriate understanding of what probably happened based upon the text. And we can still argue about which one we think fits the text better, which one is a neater solution to the issue. And indeed, that's what Rashi and many other commentators do when they make their commentaries, and will choose from this soup of stories and of interpretations to have a thread to explain one chapter. But ultimately, all the Midrashim contain truth. It's just that they didn't really focus so much on the journalism of the event. Does that make sense? Okay. And I know that can be unsatisfying because we're really, really focused in most of our life of having an accurate documentary experience of everything. But we're not as good at that as we think because we're often misled. And also it blinds us to the fact that there can be multiple truths from the same event. And Midrash is excellent at reminding us of that. Okay. And we're going to get two more versions of what happened to the other elders.
The elders were murdered when they tried to stop the building of the golden calf.
All right. So remember we said that leaders had to be motivators and teachers and decision makers. And sometimes when you do that, the mob doesn't agree. And they get killed. which answers the question of, well, how come the people were griping so much if they already had good leaders? And the answer is because they murdered their previous good leaders. And a crowd that murders its leaders shouldn't be surprised that they're now behaving worse than they were when they had good leaders. That's why you don't kill good leaders, or in other forms, get rid of them. Or
The earlier elders had been slated to death due to their frivolity at Mount Sinai. But like Nadab and Abihu, it was delayed. They were burned up at the start of the chapter.
11, right? The chapter that we're reading. Remember we had that fire at the very beginning?
Right.
And it said that people got burnt up. Those were the elders that had been the elders being burnt up finally for their transgression of when they were invited to Mount Sinai way back in the book of Exodus. And the citation is there because there in the book of Exodus it says they had a picnic, right? That they feasted, they ate. And you're coming up Mount Sinai to have the most intimate experience with God that humans are capable of, and you roll out the checkered blanket and sit down with the picnic basket and, pass me the grapes. And the sages were so shocked by that they said, well, people who behave like this in the presence of God don't really deserve to keep going on being leaders. But the giving of the Torah, such a joyous moment and so special, obviously God's not going to ruin the party by killing them. And so instead, they're delayed. And we know of two other people who got killed by a spontaneous fire, Nadab and Abihu, the two sons of Aaron that were killed back in the book of Leviticus. We've just had a bunch of other fire in this same chapter, and then suddenly we have a leadership gap. Put two and two together. It must have been that fire was like the fire of Nadab and Abihu, which was taking care of somebody who was deserving of death by fire, but whose punishment had been delayed because when they deserved it, it wasn't the right time for God to be doing that kind of punishment. But now they got it, and now suddenly we need new leaders. See how neat that comes? Again, which one's true? Less important than what is the truth it's trying to convey. What's it saying about leaders?
It's important to lead.
It's important to lead.
They're not forever.
And they're not forever. Sometimes
and the kind of leaders you have determine the kind of people that you might turn out to be.
And the way they lead, the type of leaders.
An evil leader can create evil people.
Remember going all the way back to our first midrash, the gathering of the righteous is for good and for them and for the world, and the gathering of the wicked is for bad for them and for the world. When we have good leaders, we can do great things. Sometimes we murder them though. But when we have bad leaders, they will lead us to do bad things. And so what you see here is not what necessarily is, again, the whole video version of what happened, but of trying to give us more and more lessons about these 70 or from these 70 leaders of what it means to be a leader, to be humble, to recognize you're gathering for good, not for your own self-gain, to recognize that it's not always fair or equal of who gets to be a leader or who isn't a leader, to recognize that sometimes the people will turn against good leaders for doing good things, and sometimes good leaders are not good enough and will end up doing bad things that will lead the people astray as well. And if you're speaking to a whole group of people, as the Midrash was designed, that will have to continue to generate their own leaders on and on and on. And especially in Judaism, for most of our history, we had influence over who our leaders would be. It was not a fully autocratic hereditary system, but who rose to the top was often very much dependent upon their relationship with the community and how much they had learned and what they had done. Knowing who to pick and who not to pick and knowing when to step forward and when to step back was a very important lesson to get across to our people for a few thousand years. And this little episode of Gather 70 Guys teaches many, many of the important lessons of what it means to be a good leader.
Rabbi, I know we're over. Is it an accurate statement to say that every leader that is either in the 5 books or in the
whole rest of the Bible, right?
Right, are all very human and flawed?
Yes. Some more than others.
Right.
Some of the kings I don't know if you can find good parts of them at all, but our sages do try. And some others, like Moses, are perfect almost always, but still have flaws. So yes, you don't see the godlike leaders, except for God, in anywhere in the Bible. And that's because we don't believe that that's what a leader has to be a good leader. They don't have to be perfect. They just have to be good. And good meaning the neshama, their spirit.
I'm always struck by the fact that, which I had no awareness of until I started coming to shul, that Moses doesn't actually get to the promised land. And that Solomon, you know, the idea of his wisdom is only part of the story.
Yeah, that was early in his career.
Right.
Yeah, his wisdom went downhill, unfortunately. But let's finish off with the final, most hopeful statement of the Midrash.
What is VR?
Oh, Bamidbar Rabbah. These are all taken from the same source, which is the collection of Midrashim called Bamidbar Rabbah, or Numbers Rabbah, meaning the great collection of teachings on this section.
In this world, only a few have prophesied, but in the world to come, all Israel will be made prophets.
Right? And you may think, well, big deal, right? Once the world to come comes along, everything's supposed to be done and finished, history's done. Who needs to be a prophet? Right? What am I going to predict? Lottery numbers? But everything's perfect. Why do I need to win the lottery now? It's reminding us to go all the way back to the point of where we began. It's not about predicting the future. It's about the connection to God. And being a prophet in the eyes of Judaism doesn't just mean you know what's happening tomorrow because you're predicting it. It means you know what's happening in the future because you know God. And even if the future is not constantly changing, because in the world to come, things are moving the way they should, it still reflects an intimacy and an understanding of God that is at a much higher level than any of us reach currently. And that's what we hope for, that we will eventually truly understand. And all of us, not just the leaders. Any other questions?
From your mouth to God's ears.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't hurt if we started with the leaders, but all of us eventually, yes.
You'll be here this Shabbos.
I'm here this Shabbos, and then I'm off, but we have great volunteers, as we do all the time, to cover everything in my absence. And the class will be on hiatus, though. Maybe next year I'll pick people to prepare classes while I'm gone. That we got some reactions, and we will reconvene not next week, not the week after, not the week after. What is it? July 1st, July 2nd, or something? I think it's the first Wednesday of July. Look it up on a calendar.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we have calendars.
Yes, they tell us what is to come.